Hey everyone, just a quick plug up front. If you're finding these tutorials useful, please help me out and subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to help out even more, pass this along to some other artists who you think would also find it helpful and ask them to subscribe as well. So this is going to be hopefully a much shorter walkthrough of how I retimed this flip sim from my last tutorial. This is what I got from my last tutorial, which is just using, let me see if it'll play back, just using standard DOP nodes, standard surface tension, standard reseeding. And I was really happy with the results, but I wanted to be able to retime this. And as you probably know if you've ever tried to retime, I'm just going to copy this over. This is a game dev retime tool. I'm just going to pull this over to show you what this would look like if I attempted to retime it. The points just go everywhere. It's because of the way that the flip solver handles reseeding. It doesn't maintain consistent point counts. On some frames it'll insert points, and other frames it will kill those points off. So since the retiming relies on consistent point counts or consistent point IDs, it just doesn't work. Here's what I ended up with after doing a little bit of research online and finding some help in some forums, which if you want more detailed explanations of where I got that help, check in the description here. There'll be links to the files that I referenced. And also there's a much longer video. I just want to get this one done as quick as possible for those who don't have time to watch a long-winded explanation. This is working great, and what I ended up doing was using a custom hole filling algorithm that I found on an Odforce forum posted by a guy named Karl Richter. I'll show you that forum. There'll be a link to this in the description. It's really helpful. This is the test that Karl put up, and you can see that with his hole filling algorithm, which he built in VOPs, you can really maintain these cool thin sheets, which is great. But also because of the way that he's built it, it maintains consistent point counts. And I'm going to break that down just a little bit. But I didn't just pull in his file and only use that as he made it. I was able to. There's one thing that I didn't love about what he had going on, and that's the fact that these kind of tendrils, just by way of sort of just how his hole filler functions, these as points separate, new points are birthed at a certain threshold. But what that doesn't really allow, at least my initial poking around with it never really allowed, like, this droplet will never break off, because as it gets further away, these points are going to be consistently birthed in between those, just by nature of what he's doing. And I didn't really like that. But as I was looking for help, one of the things I did find was an older file from a really fantastic Houdini artist, Alejandro Escheverry, and he's written his own custom surface tension tool, which was helpful to poke around through. And he's got a link to this work in progress of it. This guy is kind of the king of these sims. He does amazing work, and he's written a lot of custom tools, which he writes about the process. He's been interviewed about the process both on, like, grid markets and a couple different websites. He's really kind to share some of his knowledge, but he's not able to share his actual files. He'll tell you that those are in-house tools. But this is a work in progress file that kind of shows some of the methods that he's using, or the methods that he was using 4 years ago when he posted this. And I grabbed this file and started poking around to see what he was doing. And it led me to something really interesting. This is his file. And this is sort of the heart of where I was able to get my setup working how I needed it to. I'm just going to sim a few frames of this. And again, look for these files. I'll post links to those web pages I had pulled up. So in his flip solve, or on his flip solver, he's getting his surface tension from this SOP solver that he's created. And in there, again, like, I'm not going to try to explain everything that he's got going on. You can grab the file and check it out for yourself. But the interesting part of this, so he's pulling in the points, and in essence what he's doing, he's using this this surface, which is just pulled in from the DOPNet. Like, this is the flip solver creates this surface by default, but he's using it. He's converting it to an ISO surface, or converting it to eventually to a VDB, and then using some smoothing on that, and then snapping the points in his sim to that surface. He's actually snapping it to the unsmoothed surface and then snapping them also to the smoothed surface, computing the difference and setting some attributes based on that difference. So that's how he's getting his surface tension. But what was really interesting about this to me was I never thought about pulling in these fields. And what I ended up doing, I'm going to hop back over to my file. Well, what I ended up doing was taking the hole filler VOP. This is the file from Karl Richter off of the Odforce forum. So he's got this, again, a SOP solver that he's plugging into a sourcing tab. And on this, he's pulling in his DOP geometry, which is his points, and he's running this VOP setup to pull in the point cloud, open it, evaluate it based on radius and max points, and then everything in this loop is what's evaluating those gaps and eventually adding points when certain criteria are met. And it matches the velocity of the points around it as well. So that's how he's doing his hole filling. And because this is happening in the SOP solver, when a point's birthed, it's going to get a higher, like, you have your original points in the sim. And when new points are getting birthed, because nothing's dying, those new points are going to have a higher point number than the ones present originally. And because this operates every frame, that's going to be true every frame. So every frame, when a new point is birthed, it's going to get a higher point value than all of the points that are already present. And that's exactly the kind of, if you want to think about it as reseeding, that's exactly the kind of reseeding that you need to retime a sim. So I'm going to hop back over to my sim, and I'm going to hop in here. Let me enable simulation just for a few frames to get something going. And you see all these brightly white colored points. Those are all of the new points that are being birthed into my sim. So again, what I did was kind of take a combination of Alejandro's curvature, his surface tension based on mean curvature flow, and the hole filling algorithm from Karl Richter. I put that in a SOP solver that's operating on the particle velocity. You know, I really didn't. This may work and plugged into some of the other inputs here, but I plugged it into the particle velocity. Honestly, because that's where Alejandro had his surface tension calculation going on. So that's where I started, because he already had these, pulling in this surface and converting it, smoothing it. He already had that set up, so I left it there. But what I'm doing with it, I'm not using Alejandro's mean curvature flow setup to do anything with surface tension. I'm still using the stock surface tension gas micro solver. What I'm using a bit of his setup for is to isolate points where I want this hole filler to work. Like, I don't want the hole filler to work everywhere, because that never allows this separation. And if you've ever smoothed VDB surfaces with if you ever tried to mesh your sims using VDB surfacing and smoothing, you know that like thin areas break up, and that was kind of the key for what I'm looking for. Like, this is my sim, this is the DOP geometry that is pulling in, but what I want to do is just group the parts based on this smoothed volume, and you'll see that in these thin sections, that group's not present, and that's really what I'm looking for. And because in setting this group by the bounding volume, now I can say, hey, this hole filler that Karl Richter provided, I don't want you to run over this whole sim. I only want you to run on these grouped points, which are the thicker parts of the volume, and that allows for the let me get out of the sim. that allows for this to break up a bit. What you see here, you see all these drops. If I disable that group, those droplets will never form. And again, as I explained, like these points that are being birthed have, I'll just drive this point home. My original, oops, I was trying to cache something. My original sim, the geometry coming in has, I think it's 168,241 points. When you come down to my cached sim, oh, and the other interesting thing is, like, if you follow my last tutorial, I created this ramp attribute that I'm visualizing by color here as a way to add paint gradation at render time through my material. So this black value to white value is just a visual representation of this attribute that I created called ramp. And I know that ramp never gets to full 0. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because you'll see, let me also just isolate this to ramp. My highest point value is over here because it's got that higher ramp value. But just at frame 3, all these bright white, again, and this bright white is because I've got a color attribute and coming into the sim, and these new points that are being birthed by the SOP solver aren't inheriting any of these attributes, so they're colored differently, and that's actually helpful for me to have something to grab onto to do some work here in just a second. But again, I think that my highest point number going into the sim was 168,000 some odd points. You can see that these new points have a ramp value of 0. Come on. Yeah, so that was my highest point value, or my highest point number before this hole filler kicked in. And as the hole filler kicks in, look, it's just adding points to it. It's not reordering any of the points that are already present. It's just looking at gaps and kicking new points in, and that's the heart of why my retime works. And you can see, I just as for the nuts and bolts of the retime, I'm just using the game dev retime. You can use the standard retimes or the old version, the old way of doing it with a time blend and a time shift. I'm using the game dev one because I really like this ramped control. As I play this back, you can slow this down really aggressively, and it seems to hold up very well. And that's the bulk of it. That's it. Using those couple of tools, the Karl Richter's hole filling VOP setup is great. I understand some of it. I'm not going to pretend to understand everything he's got going on. I'm still trying to break that down and understand it. So that's 90% of what I'm using is his hole filling, and the other. The thing that really made it all come together was piecing in Alejandro's method of smoothing that VDB inside the SOP solver, because that allowed me to isolate the hole filling to only the areas where it needs it and not the areas where I wanted the sim to break up. And so just by way of finishing this off, I'll show you what I had to do to get my ramp attribute back to color this properly. This is nothing complicated. All I did was, after my retime, I grabbed this the split SOP, and what this is going to do is split. It's going to split your incoming geometry into these two different outputs based on whatever criteria you put in the group node. I mean, normally you would just put your group in there. I don't really have point groups, so I'm setting this point group on the fly that says if the ramp attribute equals 0, kick it out on this side. And what that is, basically, that's the way that I isolated my new points from the point filler. You could probably do this a different way. You may even be able to set a point group inside that SOP solver in your .NET. I was just kind of building this. I was kind of figuring this out as I went. So that ramp attribute that was all these new points getting the 0 ramp attribute helped me out because I was able to split that off. So based on that criteria that I put in the group, this group field, the new points are coming out the left side. That means the old points are coming out the right side. So I just transferred my attributes from the right side to the left side. And then now this isn't both groups. This is still just the new points. But now they have the right attributes on them, and then I merged them back in. And that was kind of all there is to it. And it actually looks like I may have there we go. Some of the points weren't getting the attributes because my distance threshold was too low. So yeah, then I put the attributes on the new points from the old points, merged them back together, and then my color ramp worked just as it should, and it holds obviously it holds the retime. So that's it. So check the links. Check the links for those files that Alejandro and Karl Richter put up. They're amazing. That Odforce forum, which there's also a link to, is great. So many talented artists in there talking about how to maintain thin sheets in small flip sims. It's really great. Also, the grid markets link is an interesting read to find out a little bit more about how Alejandro is approaching these flip sims. Again, he's really incredible, doing amazing work. And that's it. And if this short video is not really explaining the thought process enough, or if you want to learn more about what I was doing here, feel free to check out the longer video. I just felt like it was a bit long after rewatching it after recording it, so I wanted to do a really fast overview as well. So I hope you find it helpful. Check out the other tutorials on here on YouTube. Subscribe, and check out my website as well, whatifound.net. Thanks so much.